what if a political assassination was not just about silencing one man, but about controlling the direction of an entire nation? And what if the crime itself was never truly solved, not because of lack of evidence, but because of where the evidence was never allowed to lead? From a criminologist's perspective, this is not just a murder case. It is what is known as a political crime of influence, where ideology, power, and survival of the state begin to blur the line between justice and control. Hey guys, welcome back to Crime Stories with Yvonne. Today, we are not just telling a story. We are examining a case through history and criminology, because the assassination of Pio Gama Pinto is more than just Kenya's first major political killing after independence. It is a textbook example of political violence in a newly formed state, where competing ideologies were fighting not just for leadership, but for the soul of the country itself. Pio Gama Pinto was a Marxist-socialist ideologue, journalist, and political strategist. In simple terms, he believed in a society where wealth and opportunity were shared more equally, and where land and resources were not concentrated in the hands of a small elite. From a criminological lens, Pinto's position placed him at the center of what conflict theory describes as a struggle between competing social classes, where law and justice often reflect the interests of those in power rather than neutral fairness. And that is what makes this case so significant. Because Pinto did not just challenge individuals in power, he challenged the structure that was forming after independence. And at just 37 years old, he was assassinated. But from an investigative standpoint, the question is not only who killed him, but who benefited from his silence. On the morning of February 24, 1965, Pinto's day began like any other. He had breakfast with his wife and children, then prepared to leave for Parliament. From a criminological perspective, this moment matters because it reflects what routine activity theory describes as the perfect environment for a targeted attack. A predictable routine, a vulnerable moment of transition, and no capable guardian present. As he reversed his car out of the driveway in Nairobi, gunmen emerged from nearby bushes. The attack was fast, controlled, and executed at close range. Pinto was shot through the car window and died instantly, while his daughter survived the attack. The offenders fled without resistance, a detail that strongly aligns with pre-planned political assassination behavior rather than spontaneous violence. To understand why Pinto was targeted, we have to understand the political tension in early independent Kenya. The country was deeply divided between a capitalist, pro-Western political elite and a socialist, reformist faction that demanded land redistribution and economic equality. Pinto was not just part of the socialist side, he was one of its key strategists. From a criminological perspective, this situation reflects strain theory, where competing social and political goals create pressure that can escalate into conflict when they cannot be resolved through legitimate means. In this environment, Pinto represented more than opposition. He represented a structural challenge to emerging power. The investigation into his death reveals another important criminological issue: investigative tunnel vision. Instead of pursuing multiple leads, police quickly narrowed their focus to a small group of suspects. Two young men, Kisilu Mutua and Chij Thiuo, were arrested almost immediately. This is what criminology refers to as premature closure, where investigators settle on an early explanation and begin interpreting all evidence through that lens. The case quickly shifted away from broader political questions and toward a simplified criminal narrative. During interrogation, one of the key pieces of evidence became a confession. However, criminology has long shown that confessions obtained under custodial pressure, especially in politically sensitive cases, can be highly unreliable. Mutua later claimed that he was tortured into signing a pre-written statement. This raises serious concerns about compliance under duress, where an individual admits guilt not because of responsibility, but because of coercion. Despite these issues, the confession played a central role in the conviction. The trial itself produced an uneven outcome. One suspect was acquitted due to lack of evidence, while Kisilu Mutua was convicted largely on the basis of his contested confession. Even the judiciary seemed uncertain. Chief Justice Sir John Ainley described the case as having an unfinished aspect, a phrase that, from a criminological standpoint, reflects what is known as a case integrity failure. In other words, the legal process reached a conclusion, but the underlying truth of the crime remained unresolved. Mutua would go on to spend decades in prison, consistently maintaining his innocence. His case fits what criminologists describe as scapegoat theory in political crime, where lower-level individuals are used to absorb blame in order to protect more powerful actors from scrutiny. Indicators of this pattern include weak physical evidence, reliance on confession, and the political sensitivity surrounding the victim. In such cases, justice becomes symbolic rather than substantive. Years later, the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission revisited the assassination. Their findings pointed to a deeply troubling possibility: that there was sufficient circumstantial evidence suggesting state involvement, or, at the very least, a deliberate failure by state institutions to uncover the truth. In criminological terms, this falls under state crime theory, where harm is enabled or covered by institutions that are meant to prevent it. The Commission also concluded that scapegoats may have been used to close the case and protect those higher up in the political structure. Pio Gama Pinto's assassination did not just end a life. It shifted the political trajectory of a nation. After his death, the radical socialist movement lost momentum, and key figures within it were politically marginalized. Kenya moved further toward a centralized, elite-driven economic model. From a criminological perspective, this reflects how political violence can function not only as an act of elimination, but as a tool of long-term structural change. And so this case leaves us with a difficult question. When justice systems fail to reach the center of power, do they still deliver justice, or do they simply redirect accountability to where it is safest? Because in cases like this, crime does not always disappear. Sometimes, it is simply reorganized, reframed, and left officially solved, while the truth remains buried in plain sight. And as always, thank you for watching Crime Stories with Yvonne. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next video.